This was when she was like 15. I remember being up in her room and she said, I'm trans and I need a new name. Somehow I got a text from CVS. Your prescription for TES is available. She's like, it's mine. You can't take it from me. You can get this by making a phone call and having a teleappointment. I mean, there was no psychological evaluation. There was nothing. Where does our species go if you can cut off your body parts like this?
That was Amy Crite, the mother of a trans-identified child who was profiled in the 2022 documentary Dead Name, an indie film that can still be viewed at deadnamedocumentary.com. That poignant film, in which I was honored to be a contributor, explored an under-discussed aspect of the impact of gender ideology, the havoc it wreaks on families. Several years ago, while interviewing heartbroken parents for an article about moms and dads who were protesting at a gender clinic in the Northeast, I spoke with a mom from Connecticut who told me about an online support group she's part of for parents whose kids were swept up into the trans social contagion and were barreling down the path of experimental medicalization. This support group was a diverse mix of folks of every political stripe: Republicans, Democrats, independents, conservatives, liberals, and centrists. I asked her how they navigate this, given the polarized political time in which we live. She told me, and I'll never forget it, "No one cares about politics anymore, Brandon. We just want to save our kids." Indeed, when it comes to protecting kids from medical experimentation, all differences seem to fade away. Ask any parent who was unnerved by allowing their kids to undergo an experimental cocktail of drugs that may render them sterile and surgeries to remove their healthy body parts. They'll tell you that trans ideology doesn't just damage their kids' health and bodies, it fractures family bonds and shatters relationships. These affected parents are suffering an otherworldly anguish they never knew existed. And in the spirit of being action-oriented, which we're exploring in this season of Generation Indoctrination, in this installment we'll speak to those who are helping families recover from what many describe as the worst nightmare of their lives. As one parent put it on the Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans Substack this February, quote, "This false narrative of dead-named daughters turning into sons is unfathomable torment and agony that derails entire family systems. Grieving fathers, mothers, and siblings that aren't even allowed to safely discuss their grief in today's society without hate, judgment, allegations, threats, and violence projected onto them. Accept, lie, and pretend, or else you become enemy number one seems to be the only option," unquote. I spoke with several professionals and parents. Amy Crite is among those who have been forced to endure this guttural suffering. And in light of her experience, she has a message for parents about raising kids in an era where gender identity is repeatedly presented as the solution to all their problems. And she shared with me what propelled her to go public.
We have to get our children used to the struggle. Life is not easy. Uncomfortable feelings are part of life. Self-doubt is part of life. And finding your place is all part of it. And that I realized that I needed to do what I needed to do. And no matter what, my love was there for my daughter. Whether she realizes it not, or maybe she'll realize it later. But I wasn't going to stop what I felt I needed to do out of fear that she would not have a relationship with me. I think that a lot of parents are, stuck in that, what if my kid finds out? And I'm like, you know what? I've left enough clues around the house. It's apparent that I'm not on board with it. So I shouldn't hide it. And if putting my face out there gives another parent strength to say something to anyone, then that's enough. I get back to basics and just give more to others. Get more involved in your local community, like whether it be your church or synagogue, your homeless shelters, or whatever's in your immediate area. Connect with people of all different types of groups. I know that a lot of parents look at, my kids are volunteering with the animal shelter. Well, it's better to be engaged with people than it is. I mean, yes, it's always good to volunteer, but if you can get with people, the better it is. Try not to get caught up in being a consumer and go out and appreciate the world. Be thankful for the little things, like go on a bike ride instead of watching your computer. We just need to get out and appreciate the beauty that's around us rather than striving for something that's virtual and realistic.
But what can be done for parents who are on the front end of this struggle, before their children are targeted and become mired in this contagion, and an alternative gender identity is concretized in their minds? And given how much of this occurs in school settings, often behind the backs of parents, can parental rights be legally protected? I often ponder the plight of parents like Tammy, a feisty Midwestern mom with an unmistakably Wisconsin accent who was featured in the postscript of the documentary Dead Name. That mom was at the center of a legal effort alongside other parents in the Badger State. School officials there were socially transitioning her troubled daughter behind her back and undermining her parental authority. This was their official school policy, they told her, but she wasn't buying it. Tammy's attorney, Luke Berg, is the deputy counsel of the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Last year, he scored a major win in court on behalf of parents. The Kettle Moraine case, as it's called, is being cited around the country in other related matters. The judge ruled that the parents had a fundamental liberty interest in the decisions regarding care, custody, and control of their children, and that school districts cannot supplant a parent's right to control the health care and medical decisions for their children. And they agreed that social transitioning is a powerful psychotherapeutic intervention, which should usually be preceded by a mental health professional, conducting a psychological assessment in order to see the benefits and challenges of such a transition. Thus, whether to address a child as the opposite sex is indisputably a medical and healthcare issue, the court said. And Berg told me that this was an issue that many parents became interested in when they saw what was allowed to happen in schools without their knowledge or consent.
I started working on this, researching it, and just thought this is a pretty clear violation of parental rights, and it's pretty stunning as well. And so we put together a group of parents to challenge the policy. I think we had either 14 or 16. It was a lot of parents. And we filed a lawsuit in Wisconsin state court challenging that policy, the Madison School District, as a violation of parental rights. And that was the first case in the country to challenge one of these policies. So sort of a groundbreaking case. So that case got a lot of media attention. People were interested. I think a lot of parents weren't aware that school districts were passing these policies. But after we initiated that lawsuit and it got some of the press that it did, we just started getting calls from parents constantly on this issue. I mean, parents saying, yeah, I found this in my school district, or this happened to my child. And so about, I want to say a year later, we got a call from our clients in the Kettle Moraine case. It was a mom who said, I'm dealing with this personally. My daughter went through this issue. She was struggling with anxiety and depression. It spiraled into questioning her gender identity to the point where she wanted to change her name and pronouns at school. And we, after researching it, came across your case and your discussion of the issue and decided this wasn't what was best for our daughter. And we told the school that we didn't think that was best for her, and we wanted them to use her female name and pronouns while she was at school. And the school basically said, sorry, too bad. If you continue sending her here, we're going to respect whatever she wants in terms of names and pronouns. It doesn't matter what you parents think is best for her. And so at that point, she reached out to us and it went from there.
So Luke, what else happened as Tammy and other parents kept fighting the school? And how did you ultimately decide to take the action that you did in the courts? Did you face any legal complexities that made this a thorny, complicated endeavor?
We didn't get involved immediately, but mom, based on what the school district said, pulled her daughter from school and immediately started looking for a school that would respect their parental rights and respect their decision. Pulled her daughter from a mental health facility that had immediately rushed to affirm that she was really a boy, and that told her the sooner she transitioned, the better, and that her mom would be her worst enemy. So her mom pulled her from that environment as well, pulled her from social media. And within about 3 weeks of being removed from all those environments, her daughter changed her mind and realized, you were right, Mom, this isn't actually who I am. I was confused, and all these adults around me telling me I was really a boy confused me further. And now she's very happy and well-adjusted as a girl. So we had been talking to the parents sort of throughout this process. And after it seemed like the sort of situation had stabilized, we decided, you know what, we should represent them and do something about it to change this. And everybody who's a parent knows that, to say yes to everything your child asks for. So we wrote a letter to the district and said, what we want you to do is admit this was a mistake and change the policy. And the district refused to do that. So we ended up filing a lawsuit and we won. It was a really big win. It was the first case to win on the merits on this topic. Proud of that and excited about that. And after we won, sort of in the meantime, while the case had been litigated, the school district board switched to conservative leaning. This happened with a lot of school boards across the country during COVID. And as people started to wake up to these types of policies, I think that really got people invested in their school districts and running for school board. And so this school board flipped during that time. And so after we won in the trial court, the school district decided not to appeal and ultimately changed their policy, which was the goal. So we see that as a huge win and are really excited about what happened in the case.
As awareness grew about what the schools were doing, even parents whose kids were not identifying as transgender decided that the policy that had been enshrined was an erosion of their rights, and therefore was something worth resisting. They were concerned enough that they banded together to set a challenge in motion.
None of the parents had children who, as far as they knew, were dealing with gender dysphoria at the time, but they all had children in the school district and felt that they were directly affected by the policy because the policy says if your child deals with a struggle with their gender identity, the school won't tell you and will keep it a secret from you. And teachers are actually prohibited from telling parents about what's happening at school. I sort of like to say that they're treating school as if it's Las Vegas, right? What happens at school stays at school. Everybody who's there knows what's happening, but the parents don't get to know. And the policy even went so far to say, teachers, you might need to use one name during the school day. And when the parents show up or in communications with parents, switch back to using the other name so the parents can't figure out what's happening during the school day. So, it was a preemptive lawsuit, but I think we had a pretty strong argument that if your whole policy is to hide things from us as parents, we have to sue preemptively because we don't know what we don't know and we don't know what you might be hiding from us. And so that was sort of the basis for their standing, was just to say, we need to make sure that if this issue arises for our child, and nobody knows the future, nobody knows what their children may or may not deal with in the future, we want to ensure that the school district is going to defer to us about whether a transition is in our child's best interest. So there's probably 30 of these cases across the country now challenging these policies. In a number of them, it's clients like our Kettle Moraine clients who weren't thinking about this issue, but then they had a child who went through it, and a school district that hid the issue from them or disregarded their decision. And that kind of awakens these parents and makes them angry, as I think it would any parent, and makes them plaintiffs in cases. But there's also a lot of cases where parents are suing preemptively. And I think there's a good argument that they should have standing to be able to sue preemptively. Now the cases are going both ways, and some cases are getting dismissed on standing. If the parents can't say that they have a child who's currently dealing with gender dysphoria, other cases, and it's still early in the stages of the litigation, so it's going to take a while before all this shakes out. But I at least think there's a very persuasive and powerful argument to be made that if your policy is going to openly state that school will hide things from you, you should be able to sue in advance to ensure that if it happens to your child, you will be included and deferred to.
Even with the encouraging legal win that's now being cited across the nation against school systems overstepping their authority, the battle forges on. Perhaps the greatest betrayal many parents face is from the psychological community. Most parents I've interviewed on this subject recount their shock at how therapists flung the proverbial doors wide open, fast-tracking their struggling sons and daughters towards cross-sex hormones and surgery. The ideological capture and hasty way in which the mental health profession has promoted and greenlighted these experimental interventions has astonished them. But even amid the professional malfeasance, dissident voices can be found. I asked Pamela Garfield Yeager, a licensed clinical social worker and the author of A Practical Guide to Gender Distress, what she'd tell parents who find themselves bewildered by it all.
It's sort of a cliche, but the first thing is that you're not alone. There are a lot of other families going through this, and it's not politically driven. In fact, I've been living in California, and this is affecting more people who would lean left or in more blue areas, but they're afraid to say anything, despite what everyone says. It's the right-wing extremists, so whatever that means, that are against this. But it's not. It's actually regular families that before this actually didn't even see a problem with any of this trans stuff. So you're not alone. It doesn't make you a transphobe. It doesn't make you a bad person. To really know the truth, there's that. The big message I have for families is, especially parents who are doubting themselves because they're getting such conflicting messages from other professionals, maybe even their friends or their own family members, is to don't doubt yourself, to trust in yourself. If you know something is wrong, if you know that these are lies, even though the pride flag was on the White House last June and it's everywhere, it doesn't mean it's right. And so if you don't feel this is right, it's that old adage, just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's right. So to believe in yourself. I think that's what gets lost, is a lot of parents doubt themselves, and that creates more anxiety in the family and even more anxiety with the child, because they need an adult to be firm in the truth and what's right and what will be helpful, proper structure in the home. If a parent is just completely insecure and doesn't know what to do and is walking on eggshells, that actually just creates more anxiety in the family and makes the child feel more insecure and send them further into that trans cult ideology.
Pamela, the subtitle of your book is Tips and Tools for Families. So what else can they do to protect their kids?
The message to be is for families, especially parents, is to believe in themselves. And I'd like to empower them I give them the truth. I give them some of the facts, I counter a lot of the lies that are out there. But then I also give ideas on how you as a parent could be empowered, how you can basically talk back to professionals that emotionally manipulate you, how to understand how you're being emotionally manipulated. For example, the therapists are using the stages of grief onto parents and saying that they have to grieve their cis child now, and they act really kind. But that's just manipulation. So to understand how things seem nice and you know something's wrong, but you feel the kindness come from this therapist who might even really believe they're doing the right thing, but it's not right, especially if you don't believe it's right, and to believe in yourself. So I'm giving therapists that information. And then there's a whole section on how to talk to your kid. And I start the chapter by saying, I can't give you a script because, of course, I don't know you. I don't know your child. I don't know your relationship. But these are some ideas. And so it gives some springboard ideas, questions to ask, open-ended questions. Things like, what does it mean to be trans? To help you understand, help to open a conversation, and then maybe crack some holes in what the kid might be thinking. Those are some examples. It also includes a lot of detransitioner art and their quotes and their experiences, because many people just really aren't aware of what they're saying. If you're not on Twitter, you don't know. And so to really understand from that perspective how this can really be harmful. What inspired me to write this book is I really just want to empower families. I kind of look at it as like it's a weapon, a way to fight back. It's a big shield. We're the little Davids against Goliath with a little shield. Holding up my book as the shield. That's kind of how I envision it. Kind of wanted to put my expertise in there. I felt compelled to do it because I have so much experience working with teens and families. I felt like I was in this unique position. No, I was never a gender therapist. That's probably a good thing. But I was a teen therapist. I understand how teens work. I was a family therapist. I understand how families work. One of the biggest messages I give is look at yourself, look at your family, look at the dynamics of your family, because oftentimes that plays a big role in this, because what the trans people do is find whatever that vulnerability is in your family and exploit it. And so that's what the book is about, and that's what inspired me to write it.
Some parents have become empowered to become researchers and investigative journalists, searching out the facts for themselves. Earlier this year, a jaw-dropping report emerged in Reality's Last Stand, the Substack of evolutionary biologist Colin Wright. California mom Beth Bourne, whose daughter once identified as trans and with whom she is still not on speaking terms, decided to see how easy it would be for her to acquire hormones and undergo transgender surgeries. She found that there were no hurdles or safeguards.
What I was able to do once I became estranged from my daughter was to really dig deep into what was happening in the schools. And I just would implore any parent to do what I did. I did not know this until this last year and a half, is that you have parental rights. If your child is in public education, and definitely in private education, you have a right to know exactly what's being taught to your child. So you can either do that with public records requests to ask. But what I did, because my daughter had learned so much of this in the schools, I asked if I could sit in the classroom of my son, who's 2 years younger. I asked if I could sit in the classroom and observe the health unit being taught on gender identity. And so what I learned by sitting in the classroom next to the school principal, and of course it was embarrassing for my 9th grade son, I said, I need to be here to understand what your sister was taught. So I saw the films, videos, and I saw the slides that are shown to kids. So if you ask to see the curriculum at the district office, they might show you some handouts. But I actually watched the slides be taught where my son here in California learned that if you are a female or a girl who wants to be a boy, you can have these surgeries done. And they showed pictures that were shown to my daughter of 2 women having cosmetic mastectomies. One of them was pregnant with a beard. So they were actually showing these photos of what it looks like a pregnant man having a baby. And the other one was a very ripped woman who was pretending to be a trans man, but also showing the scars from the mastectomy. So for my daughter to have seen these photos when she was in junior high school and to see these slides, she's very bright. She's National Merit Scholar, probably, black and white thinker. So for her to see these photographs and videos, I'm sure it had a huge impact on her believing that there was this possibility that she could change her sex. And, she asked for the hormones and was even interested in having, top surgery and mastectomy done. And so if parents could do anything, it would be to really sit in the classroom, meet with a teacher before your child is allowed to see any videos or slides, to actually see them yourselves. And then the library books too. I mean, if you go to your school catalog online, you can just search the word transgender or LGBTQ and you will be surprised. There's books in, every public school that present the idea that a child could be born in the wrong body. And, these books are picture books. So they're in the kindergarten classrooms, the lower grades, as well as in high school. They're showing books, Ellen Page, having her mastectomy as if this is a celebrated person.
So Beth, what was it like talking to your daughter about these issues? Could she understand the medical risks? Did she have a grid at all for the potential harms and dangers of what these drugs can do in terms of the long-term repercussions?
I have a unique situation, or actually it's probably a situation that many parents are in, where one of the parents' daughter's father, my ex-husband, was affirming and I wasn't. And so I had to walk a very, fine line between making sure my daughter knew of my concerns, but didn't fear being around me and, want to have her father have full custody of her. So that was difficult. So I think a lot of what I did the first 3 years was sort of behind the scenes. I wish, looking back, I had brought up other examples to her besides gender that would have maybe had her be kind of woken her up a little bit. I think I would have talked more about, some of the cult ideas around how cults form or how, people get brought into cults, and some of the, the medical scandals we've had with like opioids or lobotomies, just bring up those topics in other ways.
You embarked on a months-long investigation. What did you find along the way, Beth? Were there any guardrails at all?
There are no safeguards in place. Kaiser's proud to say, we don't want to be seen as gatekeepers. Tell us what your goals are and how can we meet your goals. So I think that was shocking, but more so was that not only was Kaiser so willing to refer these hormones and these surgeries, the top surgery and the phalloplasty, but they were actually trying to encourage me to do additional procedures. When I first spoke with the mental health assessment, the gender specialist, she said, what can we do to help you with your goals? And then she gave this list, like a menu of things that Kaiser offers. So before I even brought this up, she said, in addition to the hormones and the top surgery, we also have lower surgery and we have body contouring and, a couple other things. So that was the shocking part to me, is that they're not trying to hold you back on doing these medical changes to your body. They're actually trying to encourage you to do more. And so the reason why I did this undercover work was because My daughter was turning 17, so this is a year and a half ago. And I knew once she turned 18 that I would have no ability whatsoever to keep her from doing these medical procedures. And so I wanted to really find out is how would Kaiser interact with her? And a few months earlier, they had sent her an email to invite her to a gender expression workshop. And this workshop was a place where teenagers or anyone over 13 could learn how to socially transition by learning how to cut their hair or grow their hair out, wear makeup, how to dress, how to lower their voice or raise their voice, how to have mannerisms of the opposite sex. And my daughter was invited to this workshop through Kaiser by email, and it went directly to her. And I happened to see it in her inbox. And at that point, actually, once I brought it up, she shut me off completely from being able to access her medical records, which, if you're over 14, you can tell your doctor that I don't want my parents to see any correspondence that I have with you. So Libs of TikTok, Chaya, she was actually helpful in getting out this information through her, Twitter channel, Libs of TikTok, what happened with my daughter being invited to this Kaiser workshop. So that was kind of what was in the back of my head when I got this invitation from my OBGYN for a cervical cancer screening for individuals between the ages of 21 and 65. And when I was invited to this workshop and it said individuals, I asked my OBGYN, why didn't you use the word woman? And she said to me, they want to be inclusive of their trans patients and their gender fluid patients at Kaiser. And that just set me off. And so that really started it. I wrote back to her and I said, well, in that case, please consider me a non-binary patient. My pronouns are they, them, and I'd like to be referred for hormones and top surgery. And I got an email back within 45 minutes saying that my medical records had been changed and that they wanted to get the ball rolling. That was the term they used. And I should have known that would be the response because they had done something similar with my daughter 5 years earlier where they changed her medical records right there in front of me without even asking me because the doctor heard her father use these he, him pronouns. So that's all it takes in Kaiser for you to become transgender is saying, I want my pronouns changed. If you Google Kaiser gender dysphoria, right there it tells you, how do you know if you're gender dysphoric? Because you don't like something about your body and you're anxious and stressed. And then how do you diagnose it? You tell your doctor and you describe that you're anxious and stressed because you don't like a part of your body, that you think you were assigned the wrong gender at birth. And then it says, what are the treatments for being gender dysphoric? And then it just lays out these things you can do, from the social transition to all these experimental drugs and these crazy surgeries. So it's unlike any other area of science.
So Beth, if you had a few minutes to address the nation and parents, what's the most important advice you could give them as they navigate this issue? What would that be?
If I had 5 minutes, I guess, to give advice to parents, what I think I would say is, maybe what I did, which is really put yourself in the shoes of your child. If you can do anything to imagine how your child is getting this information, what shows they're watching or what books they're reading or what they're learning in their classrooms, how are they interacting with their teachers, what flags are hanging in your child's classroom, everything you can do to really think how they are perceiving this gender ideology. Because if it's being sold to them as life-saving, affirming care, then they're going to think that if they don't do it, they're actually, risking their life. And that's a big concern too. So whatever you can do to see the world from your child's viewpoint is what I would suggest you do.
Despite mass media incessantly framing the trans issue as left versus right, the battle brings together people from across the divide like none other. Mainstream polling indicates that no matter where parents fall on the political spectrum, they do not want their children being indoctrinated or counseled on a medical or psychological path without their consent. Polls also show increasing discomfort with hormonal and surgical interventions on minors. Even in liberal bastions such as Madison, Wisconsin, Luke Berg says he hears from left-wing moms and dads who, despite strong disagreement with him on his other views, voice support for his work. And that's why he's experiencing so much success.
I would say it's not even just the victories, it's just calling attention to it. It's just shining a light in the sort of darkness of these policies. It causes people to go, this is crazy. And so in the time since we filed the Madison case, which was, February 2020, so 4 years ago now, we've seen a number of school districts in Wisconsin change their policies. A number of them decide not to implement one of these policies where you hide things from parents. We've seen other states pass laws on the subject. We've seen big political races be affected heavily by parental rights. I mean, this is an issue that most people who are a parent just think this is crazy. Even if I'm on board with a transition, even if I would be fine with my child changing gender identity, I would want to be involved. I live in Madison, which is a very liberal city. Most of the people that I interact with are very left-leaning. And I remember one conversation I had with a couple who is in my school district who, sort of heard about my work at Will. We're a conservative-leaning public interest law firm, and basically said to me, I disagree with you on almost everything you do at Will, but I agree with you on this case. And that's stunning. You think transgender, the issue is going to be this sort of hot button divisive topic, but when you poll people about the question of if your child at school is struggling with gender dysphoria, should the school defer to you or secretly do it behind your back? It's not really a close question for most people. So I think there's a lot of interesting coalitions that you can build. There's a lot of ways that this can change apart from a lawsuit, whether it's flipping the school board, whether it's passing a law at the state level, whether it's persuading the superintendent to change the policy, right? I just think there's a lot of ways to see success. And I do think the tide is turning and the ship is turning. Interestingly, the US is actually sort of now an outlier on this topic. We're seeing entire countries in Europe that used to be way more on the progressive end of the spectrum on transgender issues now putting the brakes on it and pulling back dramatically on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, but also on social transition, because they're recognizing that asocial transition has significant long-term effects on the psychology of the child, right? It's self-reinforcing. If you have all these adults around the child saying, I know you were born biologically a girl, but you're really a boy, that reinforces that belief in their mind, and that can have long-term effects. So the US is really an outlier at this point.
Next time on Generation Indoctrination, we'll hear from more parents taking action, but those who still have to conduct their advocacy from behind closed doors, out of the public eye. What is it like having to go through your life hiding behind avatars, using fake names, navigating fraught family dynamics, and pushing back from the shadows? Stay tuned.